Chapter 496, The Promising Sea.
Fountain of unaging, will you really gain eternal youth if you drink it?
Donna widened her eyes and asked curiously. She didn't have any feelings of anticipation because she was still young enough. Ellen didn't answer at once, and instead, he forked a piece of fried murloc rib meat, tore into it in 2 bites, and took a sip of Sonia wine.
The sweet and smooth taste has completely nullified the cloyed taste of fried oil.
His eyes were half closed, and he looked like a gourmet. After pondering for a few seconds, he slowly answered Donna's question.
I don't know if there's a fountain of unaging, nor am I certain if the king of immortality, Agalito, drank its waters. I only know one thing, and that is that when I was very young, I heard the legend of this pirate king. It's just like how King of the Five Seas, Nast, seems to live forever.
Their beards must be very long, extending beyond than their chests.
Denton gave his opinion.
In fact, the King of the Five Seas, Nast, has a beard that only reaches below his neck. He sits on the deck, draped in a black, splendid robe with silver ends. He wears a crown that's 2 times taller than his head and overlooks everything like a deity.
Ellen's tone gradually lowered, as though his memories had entered a quagmire, and he was unable to extricate himself.
Uncle Captain, have you ever met the King of the Five Seas?
Donna asked excitedly. This was the most legendary pirate. His name traveled through the sea, and even the children of the port cities knew his name. Whole generations of people grew up listening to stories about him.
In a sense, many people view Nast as the true pirate king. I remember one of the conditions for advancement for Black Emperor is to equate one's name with emperor, entrenching it deep in the hearts of the people. Is this an early or simplified version of an attempt? I wonder what sequence the King of the Five Seas is at now.
Although Klein was focused on sampling the murloc meat, his mind whirled as a result of the group's discussion. Faced with Donna's question, Ellen said with a sigh,
At that time I was still very young and serving on the William V. Once our fleet tried to cross the Strait of Calamity in the Berserk Sea and encountered the Black Emperor's ship there. In those few minutes, everyone, including the fleet captain, lost the will to fight. Fortunately, Nast didn't give the order to attack us.
Very cool.
The boy Denton cheered, his eyes shining. Ellen didn't continue the topic. He smiled and said,
As for King of Immortality, Agalito, I've never met him in real life. I only know that his bounty notice depicts a pale middle-aged man. How pale? Let me give an example you can understand. It's like he's been dead for some time, a corpse which is just beginning to rot.
When Donna and Denton heard this analogy, they subconsciously looked at the badly mutilated murloc's corpse and involuntarily quivered their throats.
Of course, the most important thing in a bounty notice isn't the looks, it's the bounty reward. In Loan alone, Agalito is worth 100,000 pounds. And his bounty is the lowest among the 4 kings.
Ellen diverted the topic and said,
Let's continue the stories about treasure. Ranked 3rd is the inheritance of the Solomon Empire. In the 4th epoch, when that massive empire was dissolved and destroyed, the royalty brought treasures that even the gods would be jealous of onto a ship. They steered it deep into the Fog Sea, awaiting the opportunity to rebuild their dynasty. However, 500 years passed, 1,000 years passed, and 1,500 years passed, but it ultimately didn't appear.
Rumor has it that the King of the Five Seas, Nast, inherited parts of the Solomon Empire's inheritance. No one knows if he's a descendant of the real Black Emperor.
Cecile added with interest.
Fog Sea? Western shore of the northern continent?
Donna thought back to her geography.
Right.
Cleves responded simply. West of the northern continent was the Fog Sea. To its east was the Sonia Sea. South was the Berserk Sea, and north was the North Sea. The east and west sides of the southern continent were similar to the northern continent, while south of it was the Polar Sea. Together, they formed the 5 Seas. The Lone Kingdom was backed by the Hornaces mountain range and the inland mid-seashore. Its eastern face was the Sonia Sea, and it stretched south to Desi Bay. It occupied several of the excellent entrances to the Berserk Sea, but it didn't involve the Fog Sea.
Is that so?
Donna didn't have much interest in the faraway treasure, so she switched focus and asked,
What about the fourth treasure?
It belongs to the last empire of the fourth epoch, Trunsoist. Rumor has it that they built a huge ship the size of a city and they transferred all their treasures onto it. Funny enough, their escape was of no use. Although the predetermined passengers and crew didn't fail to arrive at the port in time, none of them survived. However, that ship vanished by itself. Up to this day, people often claim to see a gigantic ship sail by them silently in a foggy night. It's been called the Spectre Empire, and it appears across the Sonya Sea. This is the conclusion from all those stories.
Ellen looked up at the red moon hanging high in the sky as he said with a tone of mockery, without any disguise of his longing.
Perhaps we will see it pass us by tomorrow night. No, tonight.
Donna thought with anticipation and excitement. Klein finished up the rest of his food, drank his black tea, and listened with interest to what Ellen had to say about the rest of the treasures.
The fifth is the lost city of Newens. Rumor has it that at the bottom of the Fog Sea, there's a civilization with intelligent creatures. Around that patch of sea, seafarers and adventurers often find special items, which all point to the Newens of ancient times. However, the members of this civilization have yet to appear. It's like it has been lost to this world.
Ellen drank the remaining of his Sonya blood wine and said,
That is an inheritance left behind by a civilization. The magnitude of its wealth is absolutely unimaginable.
After pausing for 2 seconds, Ellen put down his glass and laughed.
In fact, the treasure I look forward to the most is one which has more accounts than legends, the sunken laurel. More than a century ago, it carried gold, jewelry, and various valuable items that the kingdom obtained from East Balaam. As it steered away from the sea route, it sunk in an unknown area somewhere between the Berserk Sea and Sonya Sea. It hasn't been found to this day. It's said that the items on board are worth millions of pounds.
Millions of pounds?
The number caused Donna to blurt out in astonishment. As a merchant's daughter, who had been educated for many years, she had a vague understanding as to what this number represented. In Lowen, a millionaire was a genuinely rich person, second only to the top noble families and tycoons.
Millions of pounds? As a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, a major shareholder in the coin company, Mrs. Mary, who allowed me to join the Quelaag Club for free, is only worth a few £100,000, and even so, she's rich enough even in the circle of aristocrats and merchants. She's a popular divorce lady, and there are even aristocratic children who propose to her.
Klein quickly found a target for comparison. Ellen sighed with a smile.
If I can find the sunken laurel, then I don't have to be a captain anymore. I'll head to Backland and become a philanthropist. I'll purchase land and donate to political parties and get a hereditary aristocratic title.
I've heard Talim mention before that a baronet costs about £300,000 and about £800,000 for a baron. If you manage to get your hands on the treasure, the titles of Viscount and even Earl is something within the limits of imagination. Millions of pounds.
Klein helped Ellen perfect his plan.
If it were me, I wouldn't do that. I'll buy a huge manor.
Cecile also began to imagine her life after finding the treasure.
I want to hire many servants and helpers, plant large tracts of wheat, build vineyards, make wine for myself. Also, I want to have a room where I can sunbathe, have leisurely moving cows, sheep, and horses, and have bread from my own mill, just like a beautiful, picturesque scene.
Ellen laughed when he heard that.
Ma'am, do you know how much a manor like this is worth?
No, I don't.
Cecile shook her head.
It's only a few £1,000s. If you find the sunken laurel, you can buy 1,000 of those manors.
Ellen used exact numbers to illustrate the value of the treasure. 1,000 manors? Cecile couldn't help but raise her cup and drink a mouthful of black tea. Before this, she had known that several £1,000,000 was a lot of money, but she hadn't expected it to be this much. In order to alleviate the shock in her heart, She looked at Cleves and said,
Boss, if you find the sunken laurel, what do you plan on buying? No, what sort of life do you wish to have?
Cleves fell silent for a moment before saying,
Return home. I'll hug my wife and children, telling them that I no longer need to go on an adventure out at sea again.
Not a bad guy.
Klein nodded slightly. Donna looked at him curiously.
Uncle Adventurer, what about you?
Klein replied expressionlessly.
Tell myself not to sleep anymore. Hurry up and wake up.
Donna spat out the sweet iced tea she'd just drunk, but fortunately the fried fish on the table had already been eaten. At this moment, Klein sighed inwardly.
Even though I know it's basically impossible to find the treasure, otherwise the various churches would have already done it with all the powerhouses they have. But when discussing such topics, I couldn't help but get excited. This is the charm of treasure. Even if it was just a legend, it can attract many adventurers.
Donna wiped her mouth and sat down like a lady, as though she wasn't the one who had lost her composure. The little boy, Denton, asked, still eager for more.
Are there any other legends of treasure?
Ellen looked at Cleves, indicating that he should answer. Cleves calmly drank a mouthful of black tea and said in a deep voice,
There are countless treasures at sea. The hidden lands of the elves, the missing pirate ships in the depths of the fog, the underwater city sealed with powerful monsters, the last secret trove of Emperor Roselle, and so on.
The Emperor had already reached the level of leaving treasures and legends for others. If it's true, would there be cards of blasphemy in it? How many would there be? The legend of the Key of Death might help Mr. Azik regain more of his memories.
Klein thought with curiosity and anticipation. Chapter 497, The Wall of Rewards. After the talk about the legends of treasures that had inspired generations of adventurers to go to sea came to an end, the cook had also finished roasting the flesh of the murloc's belly. They were white after being cooked, charred a little black, and covered with tiny brown particles that glistened with a moist, oily glow. The repeated smearing of seasonings had already seeped into the texture of the meat, effusing it with a tantalizing visual effect. Ellen pointed at the white porcelain plate the cook lowered.
Desi grilled fish. It's different from how you usually eat it.
Donna held her fork and knife and eagerly said,
I love honey-roasted fish, but this is also very appetizing.
Honey roasted fish. How much honey would that take? If I have a chance to try it, the taste should be pretty good.
Klein allowed his imagination to run wild. With a chef, there was no need for them to serve themselves. They could only look on expectantly as pieces of fish were sliced, placed on different plates, and served in front of them. Klein was very serious when it came to tasting delicacies, so he was in no hurry to deal with the fish. Instead, he took a sip of black tea and used a slightly sour liquid to clear his mouth of any remaining flavors. After doing all of this, he forked a piece of fish and stuffed it into his mouth. In a split second, he felt the slightly stimulating flavors of fennel, basil, and other spices. They were sufficient enough to help him open up one taste bud after another. Immediately after, the delicious juices of the meat, the slightly astringent taste of the sea salt, and the refreshing, sour, and sweet taste of lemon all burst out at the same time, filling his oral cavity and making his mouth water. As he chewed, the last bit of the fish meat's stubbornness was broken off one by one, after having its fat roasted out of it, fully presenting the splendor of the meat as well as its faint sweetness. Swallowing the fish in his mouth, Klein recalled a delicacy program he had watched in his previous life and chose the evaluation line that matched what he just felt.
The layered flavors are very clear. Excellent.
Haha, your tone and words make you sound like a gourmet.
Ellen joked. Donna waved her fork and echoed.
Uncle, perhaps you should write a column in the newspaper about different restaurants and different cuisines.
Why didn't I think of this idea? This is a good job that can earn me money, as well as allowing me to taste delicacies. The only problem is that an obese man can't be a flexible clown. Use the great art of spewing vomit? What a waste of food.
Klein seriously considered Donna's suggestion.
To a beautiful night.
When there was very little food left, Ellen poured himself some more of the Sonia blood wine and raised his glass with a ruddy face. Klein and the others echoed in similarly good moods.
To a beautiful night.
They drank the rest of the liquids from their glasses and watched the waiter clear the table and clean the deck. They talked for a while more amidst the cold wind, talking about the mermaids that Donna was most interested in. Cleves told the young lady that, in some legends, mermaids were also called sirens, and they used their songs to confuse humans not for entertainment, but for hunting. Aside from the possibility of encountering these creatures on the sea route from the Gargus archipelago to the depths of the Sonia Sea, there was a certain chance of discovering it in dangerous seas that haven't been explored by humans. However, all of this stemmed from the drunken boasting of certain pirates, and they all avoided the question of how they escaped from the mermaids' songs, which made it highly suspicious.
No matter what, this at least points me in a possible direction.
Klein took note of what they had discussed.
Donna, Denton, it's time to go back. You'll have to get up early tomorrow and have breakfast with your parents.
Cecile looked at the moon's position.
Fine.
Donna stood up reluctantly. Denton hurriedly asked,
Do I have a chance at becoming an adventurer?
His mind had been captivated by the previous hunt and the legends. Cleves walked to his side, patted his shoulder, and said,
Before you ask this question, you need at least 5 years of combat training and studying. I think your father will hire a good tutor for you.
Yeah.
Denton's eyes lit up, and he nodded vigorously.
After 5 years, the adult, you probably won't want to be an adventurer who can find himself buried at the bottom of the sea at any time. Cleves' handling of the situation was very shrewd. He didn't immediately refuse him, but rather he gave him hope and let time wash away his interest. This prevents the child from becoming suddenly rebellious. Regardless, mastering a fighting technique is always beneficial for anyone.
Klein put his hands in his pockets and thought with appreciation. On the way back to the interior of the cabin, Cleves handed 2 5-pound notes to Klein.
Your payment.
He had just received 150 pounds from Ellen's purchase of the whole Murloc.
I didn't do anything.
Klein instinctively refused. Cleves glanced at him with his pale blue eyes and said in a low voice,
You freed up Cecile and took good care of the children.
Took good care of the children?
Klein was somewhat amused, but he finally took the 2 bills and drew a triangle on his chest.
You're more generous than I thought. Thank you.
He stopped declining because he suddenly figured out something. If he hadn't accepted the 10 pounds, then in the eyes of a veteran adventurer like Cleves, it would appear as though he was dissatisfied with the price and was attempting to get more, making it possible that he would attack them at any time. Among self-proclaimed adventurers, there was definitely no lack of greedy madmen. Seeing Gehrman Sparrow pocket the money, Cleves looked away and said flatly,
This is a rule of the sea.
Without another word, he followed Cecile, Donna, and company into the cabin.
If I could get such rewards with every single mission and job of this difficulty, then I would have long made a fortune with my job as a private detective.
Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and turned his head to look at the red moon hanging high in the sky. It still shone quietly and gently in the night.
Legends of the sea, different monsters. I finally found the slight feeling of being an adventurer.
Klein turned around and walked to the edge of the ship. Bathing in the crimson veil, he admired the waves that were growing darker. Gradually, his mood settled as he walked out bit by bit from the gloom of Backland's great smog. The cold, damp wind slapped his face, and the vast, endless ocean caught his eye, opening up his heart. For a moment, Klein felt the urge to sing, but when he opened his mouth, he found that he couldn't remember the corresponding modern verses.
I can't just end up saying, "Oh, see, you're all water." The Emperor's savant sequence is really well suited to doing such things. When I have the time, I should read through his poems so as to not look like illiterate.
Klein lampooned as he looked at the red moon and the ocean before sighing.
What a beautiful night.
After an accidental episode of getting lost, the exploratory team returned to the City of Silver. Looking at the wall's cracks filled with weeds, Derek found himself in a trance, as if he had been gone for many years. Diagonally behind him, Demon Hunter Colin's eyes suddenly wore a lost look as he raised his hand to press on his right temple. The rest of the team members were filled with joy and relief from the bottom of their hearts. After a difficult exploration, having a home waiting for them was the happiest thing in their hearts. Colin's gaze returned to normal as he turned his head to the side and looked diagonally ahead. Backland, the White family. After some thought, the confident Emlyn came up to his parents and asked,
"If I wanted to delve into the history of us Sanguine, who would I look for? If I were to ask about the City of Silver directly, it's very likely that I'll be exposed for being problematic. Although I'm not afraid and very calm, for the ancestor and in order to save the entire Sanguine race, I have no choice but to hide it. I've always been interested in the history of Sanguine. I've collected a lot of information, and father and mother know that, so I wouldn't be suspected in any way. This excuse is perfect."
Emlyn praised himself inwardly. He resembled his father to a certain extent. He wore gold-rimmed glasses that made him look very professional. The gentleman who had gotten his doctorate in medicine put down the thick anatomy book in his hands, nudged his glasses, and said,
"No one in Backland knows more than Lord Nibs. If I dared to seek Lord Nibs, I would have long done so."
Emlyn thought of Mr. Fool's description of him being a messiah. That had to bear the burden of a secret while being misunderstood, as he pressed with a solemn expression.
"Aside from Lord Nibs, he's sleeping underground, so it's not convenient for him to be disturbed."
Emlyn's father pulled up the collar of his thick cotton pajamas and thought for a moment.
"Waymondy, he always thinks of himself as a historian."
Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and smiled.
"I wish to visit him."
Woo! The whistle sounded, and the white agate sailed into Demir Harbor. It would replenish fresh food and water on the colonial island and set sail again the next morning. After hunting the Murloc, Klein spent the next 2 days of what could be described as a leisurely or boring life. He was completely bored by the scenery of the sea, and he decided to head to the harbor's bar to look around that very night, hoping to get more information on mermaids and inspiration for acting.
If I were to come across a pirate whose hands are stained with blood on shore, I wouldn't mind teaching him a lesson. There are still souls waiting to be released from creeping hunger.
Klein's forehead sweated as he equipped himself with all his mystical items as he left his cabin before heading down to the harbor. During this process, he met Donna, Cleves, and the others. They seemed to be heading over to a port restaurant to taste Demir's most famous cured meat. Donna and Denton greeted the adventurer, whom they had just gotten to know, without their parents noticing, and seemed curious as to where he was going. Klein smiled back, pulled up his collar, and following the directions of the sign, found the nearest bar, Flying Fish and Wine. Klein looked at the signboard and saw that the outside of the bar was plastered with bounty notices. Among them were the 800,000 pounds belonging to the King of the Five Seas, and more than 100 pounds for the common pirate captain. This formed a unique landscape that ranged from the highest to the lowest.
It's all money.
Klein stood on the spot and looked at it for a long time. He withdrew his gaze, pushed open the door, and entered the bar, only to find that it was abnormally quiet. It didn't have the din that such places came equipped with. What happened? Klein looked around and saw Captain Elland, in a dark red coat, sitting at the bar, as well as 2 large men in the middle of the room, facing each other. Chapter 498, Persona. The standoff was between a brawny man in a blue white striped shirt, a symbol of the Navy. Despite the weather being at near 0 temperatures, he had his arms bare. He held a dagger against the throat of the man opposite him, but his glabella was being pointed at by an ancient musket, one which could have been placed in a museum. The musket's owner was also more than 1.8 meters tall, with strong muscles and an oily face. He had shaved his hair, and with a sea eagle tattoo, he cursed.
Dogshot, Navy sailor. No one in Demir Harbor would dare slander me as a pirate's informant.
The Navy sailor didn't yield to him, and both sides fully illustrated the rich profanities of the sea. Klein observed for a few seconds, then he walked around the edge to Captain Elland, who had a straight sword at his waist and a hidden musket on his body. He asked in a calm and casual manner,
What happened?
A quarrel between two drunkards. In Demir Harbor and in the surrounding waters, there's always been such rumors that Sea Eagle Logan is in service of the Master of the Black Tulip. The Navy sailor had mentioned this a moment ago, and Sea Eagle just happened to hear that.
The Master of the Black Tulip? Isn't that Admiral Hell Ludwell?
Klein turned and sat down on the high stool in front of the bar counter. He tapped the wooden countertop.
1 glass of Southville beer.
A bronze-skinned bartender with pearly white teeth wiped the cups, as he said, with zero passion.
6 pence.
When it comes to continental specialties, the prices are much higher than Backland and Tingen.
Klein fished out a handful of copper pence, counted 6 pence, and gave it to him. At this moment, Logan and the Navy sailor were stopped by the bar's bouncer. After they each spoke harshly to each other, they retreated to different corners. Perhaps it was due to him losing his dignity, the Navy sailor hurriedly left after about 10 seconds. The atmosphere in the bar became lively once again. Captain Elland pointed to the stairs by the side of the bar.
Want to play some cards?
No.
Klein's main purpose for coming was to gather information. Brew. Elland subconsciously wanted to pat him on the shoulder, but his cold and sharp demeanor stopped him. He could only pull back his hand and pretend to adjust his dark red coat and remind him.
Don't get the women here.
Klein nodded, picked up the glass of Southville beer, and took a swig. Elland carried his lanti-proof and stepped onto the stairs that led to the 2th floor.
Also, don't trust anyone here. Only a small portion of what they say is true.
Klein turned his head to glance at him and asked, without a change in expression,
Including you?
Elland was taken aback at first before he laughed out loud.
Perhaps. At least my reminder just now was real. Oh, and me being a man is true as well.
Not necessarily. There's a potion called witch in this world.
Klein looked away, drinking slowly and listening to the surrounding drinkers boasting. 2 or 3 minutes later, a short, thin man sat down next to Klein with his drink. He tilted his head and smiled.
Mate, you look like an adventurer.
The man who greeted him had black hair, blue eyes, and aged facial features. His temperament was rather wretched. Klein replied coldly.
You could say that.
The short man looked around and lowered his head, suppressing his voice while he said,
I can tell you're a hunter that chases after bounties and riches. Have you heard of the Spectre Empire?
I've heard of Amway, and I've also heard of the Father in Heaven and the Messiah being sealed at the bottom of the sea.
Using the power of Faceless, Klein sent out a signal not to approach him.
Yes, a huge, ancient ghost ship full of treasures.
The short man said in an infectious tone,
We have clues to it. We found some information about where it will appear next. We don't want the pirates or the Navy to benefit from it, and we don't want to be robbed of our wealth, so we've decided to hire our own armed merchant ships to wait in that area, which would probably cost about £1,000. I've already found 15 companions and raised £720. Are you interested in participating?
Without waiting for Klein to speak, he fumbled for a stack of brownish-yellow letters.
I know you won't believe it so easily. In fact, no one will. But after the 15 friends who read through this information, all of them decided to join in on our plan.
Do I have such a gullible face? Or would any bumpkin end up in this situation without slipping away from this sort of thing?
While Klein was considering whether to appraise the letters, from the corner of his eye, he saw that Sea Eagle Logan, who was previously squabbling, was walking towards him.
Woody, You're trying to scam someone again. You damn sewer rat.
Logan picked up the short man and threw him into the open space in the middle of the bar, where he landed on the ground, sprawling. The muscular man with the bluish-green tattoo on his head sat in the same position as Woody and guffawed.
Sorry, these are the rats of our Demir Harbor. They always do things that ruin our reputation. In fact, we're all very friendly. If you have anything you want to ask about, don't hesitate to ask me. Hehe. Don't believe what they say about me. I'm an upright person, and I have nothing to do with Admiral Hell.
The more you emphasize that, the more suspicious it becomes.
Klein's expression didn't change as he calmly said,
I want to know the latest rumors.
Sea Eagle Logan slammed the bar top and said to the bartender,
No problem. Give me a plate of special cured meat. I'll be treating this mate to our most famous delicacy in Damir.
The bartender, while still maintaining his cold expression, pushed open the door and entered the kitchen. Soon he brought out a plate of red and white, finely cut cured meat. He didn't look at Sea Eagle Logan, and he instead looked straight at Klein.
5 pounds.
Sea Eagle Logan turned his head to the side, smiling warmly as he raised his arm to show his muscles.
5 pounds. Everyone just heard it. In order to thank me, you offered to treat me to some special cured meat.
For a moment, Klein didn't realize what had happened. It was only when the bartender urged him a 2-time that he realized he was being blackmailed. Furthermore, their scam was rather well planned.
First, they used an easily seen-through farce to let Sea Eagle Logan appear, thereby winning a good impression with the target. Then, with the excuse of treating the target, order an especially expensive special cured meat, and then finally he goes back on his word and turns matters upside down and forcing a sale. It's no wonder that when Rat Woody was thrown out, those drunkards didn't make a sound. They were all afraid of this Logan, who's rumored to be in the service of Admiral Hell. How should I deal with this? My present persona is Gehrman Sparrow, a somewhat crazy adventurer and bounty hunter.
Klein raised his cup and drank a mouthful of the rich malt-flavored beer and said with his usual tone,
Why don't you just rob me?
Logan was a little stunned by the question.
Why don't I just rob you?
Soon after, he saw a fist expanding before his face. Thump! Klein's left fist landed on Sea Eagle Logan's chin, knocking him backwards toward the bar counter. With a push of his right palm, Klein nimbly left his chair and approached Logan's falling body. His legs tensed, and his knees jerked upward, slamming into Logan's lower abdomen. Pfft! Logan threw back his head, his eyes bulging while his mouth hung half open. Klein drew his gun, shoved the revolver into the man's mouth, and pulled the hammer back. Logan shouted indistinctly.
I am.
Klein looked him in the eye, pulled out his revolver, and swung it, striking the side of Logan's face with the butt of the gun. Logan's teeth fell out one after another, and his mouth was stained with blood. Faced with such a heavy blow and a pain that exceeded his limits, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Klein propped him up and pulled a handful of loose bills and coins out of his pocket. Since he estimated that there wasn't more than 5 pounds with just a glance, Klein threw them on the bar and calmly said,
Keep the change.
The bartender's bronze face turned slightly pale as he shouted in panic.
My boss is White Shark.
Without looking at him, Klein released his hand and allowed Sea Eagle Logan to fall to the ground. Then he sat down again, forked up a piece of cured meat, and stuffed it in his mouth to taste it. He found it rather unique as the flavors of the condiments spread out in wisps, scratching at his belly and throat. Mechochi. After eating 2 pieces, he looked up and asked,
Does your boss know that you're colluding with Sea Eagle?
The bartender mumbled an answer.
No.
Seeing that Klein had no intention of continuing his attacks and had paid the bill so quickly, the bouncers who had gathered nearby silently retreated. Klein took a sip of his wine, glanced at Sea Eagle Logan on the ground, and calmly said to the bartender,
He's Ludwell's informant. How much is his bounty worth?
The bartender shook his head and said,
No, he's not. This is just something he says about himself, the information he spread himself. That Navy sailor from before was hired by him. That's the only way to make everyone here afraid of him.
Upon hearing this answer, the drinkers at the bar all put down their glasses in surprise. Some of the drunkards even staggered over to Logan and spat in his face. Pui, 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 pui. Many drinkers followed suit. You're bad? Klein lowered his head again and said, while eating the special cured meat.
Tell me about the recent rumors.
The bartender breathed a sigh of relief as he wiped his glass and gave an intermittent account of the rumors in the past 2 months. Some of them were what Klein had heard before, and there were also things he just learned. The Imperial Navy's ironclad warship, Pritz, had destroyed a passing pirate crew during routine training. Panic over the behemoth's cannons has begun to spread among the small and medium-sized pirate powers. Some of them even wish to take advantage of the ironclad warship fleet's inchoate form to madly commit crimes before withdrawing from this trade with a sum of money. The sea wouldn't be peaceful for the next 6 months to a year. Admiral of Blood Senor and Vice Admiral Dusk Bulatov Ivan had a conflict in the southern waters of Sonia Island, and each of them lost 2 ships in the massive skirmish. Klein listened without asking questions, and he gradually filled his stomach. Seeing that the plate containing the special cured meat had been emptied and having finished the rest of his beer, he slowly stood up. Klein handed the plate to the bartender.
Remember today's lesson.
The bartender was about to reach out when the hair at the back of his head was grabbed. Bang! Klein shoved him down hard, knocking the bartender's head against the bar top, sending splinters flying and blood gushing. The customers all tried to avoid the impact, and the bouncers rushed over quickly. After doing all of this, Klein clapped his hands and picked up his own glass, trying to pour the rest of the beer onto the bartender's head. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. Klein silently gave up. He turned around and bent down, grabbed Sea Eagle Logan, and threw him to the bouncers who were rushing over. Taking advantage of the moment when the bouncers were dodging and the bar being in chaos, Klein quickly ran, agilely circling around them, and easily left flying fish and wine. He pushed down his hat and quickly proceeded forward, turning towards a neighboring street. After continuously changing directions, he suddenly slowed down his pace, and a gold coin appeared in his hand. The gold coin kept weaving around in his fingers as if it was scouting something. Chapter 499. Solicitation. Ding! The gold coin quietly flipped up, tumbled down, and firmly lay in the palm of Klein's hand. Lowering his head to glance if it was heads or tails, Klein spun his heel and smoothly turned into a quiet, dark alley. The wind by the sea was cold and strong, and it caused a convection in the area, propelling his coat up without him realizing it and causing his half-top hat to almost fall off. Suddenly, Klein stopped, turned around, and said in a deep voice,
Come out.
His eyes were sharp as he stared at the shadow around the corner. After 4 or 5 seconds of silence, a figure emerged from the shadows. He chuckled and said,
Very sharp.
It was a man in a black cloak, approximately 30 years of age, and his eyebrows were charred yellow while his dark blue eyes were bright. His face wasn't too chiseled, as though he was from the area south of Intis, Lemberg, and Seagar. As soon as he saw him, a picture flashed in Klein's mind. As he entered the Flying Fish and Wine, he had professionally looked around for anyone he needed to pay attention to. The answer at the time was no. The man had been drinking like a sailor and watching curiously from the side. He was no different from the other guests, and his appearance wasn't distinctive, but his black cloak had left a certain impression on Klein, allowing him to recognize the person who tailed him in an instant. Klein, who was maintaining his persona, bent down slightly, like a huge feline, ready to pounce, asking,
What do you want?
The man in the black cloak laughed once again.
The fighting technique and handling method that you displayed just now was very consistent with my taste. I chased after you to ask if you're interested in joining us. Although that guy named Logan was indeed pretending to be an informant of Ludwell, White Shark Hamilton does have connections with many pirates. He's a character with a shady background, so he'll definitely take your act of beating up one of his men at the bar to heart. There will definitely be problems for you in the future, and I can help you resolve this problem. you're an adventurer, so it's necessary for you to have dreams of treasure. As for us, we're people who banded together in a bid to seek treasure, such as the Spectre Empire, Solomon's Inheritance, the Secret of the Fountain of Unaging, the Death's Key, the Sunken Laurel, and Rozelle's treasure while traveling the 5 seas. Today, although we haven't accomplished any of our main goals, we've found many missing pirate ships. Heh, what I said does sound like what that rat had said, right?
He cleared his throat and said,
Frankly speaking, we're a band of pirates formed from a group of adventurers. But we only plunder merchant and passenger ships when we're especially poor, and we don't harm the innocent. Our main focus is on finding treasures, and we often reap harvests. And I kid you not, I once slept on a bed formed of gold coins. If we run into any other pirate ships, just showing them our prowess wins us some compensation. By the way, our captain has decreed that before we recruit new people, we have to explain our creed and remuneration.
Klein deliberately softened his tension to see if the enemy would take the opportunity to attack, thinking,
Creed? Your captain is a little interesting.
The black-cloaked man smiled in a relaxed manner.
What I said previously was our creed, and now let me talk about the remuneration.
Although he wasn't a spectator, Klein could tell that he was very confident and that he was completely unfazed by the scene in front of him, thinking,
This fellow is quite confident.
The black-cloaked man casually introduced,
We don't have any weekly salaries or annuity, but once we find treasure or obtain riches from plundering, they'll be distributed according to our ranks. Under normal circumstances, when our luck is still pretty good, the lowest-ranking sailor can earn about £200 to £300 a year. I heard that this would make one a member of the middle class on land? If we find the sunken laurel, all of us will become tycoons. According to our ranks, we would get different days off every month, but they can only be accumulated together and done in a staggered fashion.
As he spoke, he suddenly cursed softly.
Dog shit. Just the year before, we missed a good chance of finding the Spectre Empire because Captain was on holiday.
Klein found it somewhat surprising, thinking,
Pirates have annual leave?
He could only feel the pirate crew's comedic intensity from the man's description, reminding him of the humorous Somali pirate recruitment advertisements he had seen in his previous life. Seeing that Klein appeared shocked by his words, the black-cloaked man added with a smile,
As an adventurer, are you still chasing after the powers that transcend nature as told in legends? As long as you join us, you'll have a chance to possess them.
Having said that, he coughed and said,
I forgot to introduce myself.
His expression turned solemn, no longer looking as jocular as he was before.
Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards' subordinate, 4th bosun of the Golden Dream, Blazing Danitz.
After reporting his title, real name, and identity, Danitz waited patiently for the look of panic and fear to appear on Klein's face. After a second, he heard the adventurer, who acted somewhat crazily despite looking refined and polite, say in a low voice,
Blazing Danitz with a bounty of £3,000?
Danitz was about to reply when he had the illusion that the man standing in the dark alley had turned into an indescribable hungry monster salivating over his soul and flesh. He suddenly clenched his fists, his body no longer as relaxed as it had been earlier. He was so tense that he was trembling slightly. His intuition told him that he was facing an abyss filled with madness and bloodlust. In this state, Danitz had no idea how much time had passed until the other party spoke again.
Why are you here?
Blazing Danitz's dignity made him scorn to answer this question, but his instinct made him spit out the reason.
I'm on vacation.
As soon as he finished speaking, he felt the man retract his gaze, the hunger to gnaw on his flesh and soul disappearing. He stood where he was and watched as the young adventurer in a black coat and a silk half-top hat turned around and walked to the other end of the alley. He stopped when he was about to turn the corner, and turning his head, he asking,
Where's White Shark?
Blazing Danitz answered truthfully.
He lives at 1 Seawall Avenue, but he spends most of his time on the 2nd floor of the Flying Fish and Wine. It's no different today.
Only when the figure disappeared into the distance did Danitz straighten his back and take off his cloak. He sighed silently.
What a terrifying fellow.
Following that, he found his thoughts and muttered to himself,
I have to inform Captain that there's another terrifying person at sea. This is a guy who looks like a gentleman on the outside, but he has a heart like a lunatic's. If one doesn't have the determination and confidence to kill him, it's best not to deal with him.
Danitz pulled up his black cloak's hood and decided to return to the hotel for some sleep. He planned to wait until the telegraph office opened the next morning before relaying the message to his middleman contact in the Rorstead archipelago. As for what would happen to White Shark, he didn't care at all. In the corner of another quiet street, Klein stood in the shadows, looking down at the black glove on his left hand. He found that, although creeping hunger had been sealed by Mr. Azek, its thirst for flesh and souls still intrinsically existed and was trying to manifest itself. Under normal circumstances, Klein wasn't worried that the sealed item would produce any problems, but when he had the urge to kill someone, the corresponding influence he would receive was enough to let that hunger, which could lash back at him, emanate. Earlier, when he heard that Danitz was a famous pirate on the bounty list, killing intent instantly rose inwardly out of his yearning desire, causing creeping hunger to become as active as a fish in water. Fortunately, Klein always had good self-control in this aspect. From his words, he was able to judge that he wasn't a pirate who was riddled with sin, so he easily restrained his impulse.
With creeping hunger, Gairman Sparrow's persona will be flawless.
Klein paused for a few seconds, took out a gold coin and performed 2 divinations. First, he divined if Blazing Danitz was lying, and second, if White Shark Hamilton was able to cause harm to him. The first revelation showed that there was no need for Blazing Danitz to lie, and the second one showed that White Shark Hamilton was unable to cause harm to him. Klein put away the gold coin, pressed down his hat, and while doing so, he swept his palm down and touched his face. He instantly changed his appearance, blonde hair, blue eyes, and ordinary facial features. Then, Klein unbuttoned his overcoat and pulled up the inner shirt so that it was no longer stuffed into his trousers. After a simple change of his attire, Klein, who didn't carry a cane, began sweating. His lips were dry as he identified the direction and headed back to the Flying Fish and Wine Bar. On the way, he met Blazing Danitz again. The man only glanced at him once before withdrawing his gaze and headed for the hotel opposite the bar. After inspecting the bounty wall, Klein calmly reached out with his hand, pushed open the door, and walked in. At this moment, it had been less than 10 minutes since he escaped. In the bar, most of the customers had dispersed, but there were still a lot of drunkards gathered here to watch the show. Their eyes swept over the new guest, but they all withdrew it soon after, and Klein made his way unimpeded to the bar counter. He saw the bartender standing with frightened eyes beside a fat man, his forehead heavily bandaged with white bandages, his nostrils stuffed with tissue paper, and his face was bruised. The fatty was tall and big, his skin was fair, and he looked like a big white shark that had swam itself ashore. He touched his shiny bald head and said to Elend, who was wearing a dark red jacket and a straight sword,
"Someone told me that you know that guy? There are only 3 passenger ships that docked today, so there won't be many unfamiliar outsiders. Don't try to lie."
Elend patted the hilt of his sword and smiled casually.
Yes, he is my passenger. But the problem today clearly stemmed from your people.
The tall, big-sized white fatty said with a frown,
"So I just want him to come back here, apologize to me, and compensate me for the damage done to the bar."
Elend laughed and said,
White Shark, I have a proverb from my hometown. Don't hate wild dogs that pass by just because of the rats in the storehouse.
White Shark Hamilton narrowed his eyes.
"Just Elend, is this your answer?"
Elend gripped the wooden handle of the musket, took a step forward, and said with a deep voice,
Yes, this is my answer.
Klein was slightly surprised at Elend's response, thinking,
Captain sure has his way of doing things.
After staring at each other for a few seconds, White Shark Hamilton took in a deep breath.
"You've helped me before, so I don't need an apology. However, he must compensate half of my losses, and you will be the one to pass them on.
Ellen smiled.
Good suggestion.
White Shark Hamilton's face darkened as he looked around. He suddenly threw out his hand, slapping the bartender in the face. The bartender flew out, all his teeth dropping to the floor. Ah! Klein quietly watched from 5 meters away, as if none of this had anything to do with him. Chapter 500. Interrogating White Shark. Bam! The bartender fell to the ground, writhing in pain. White Shark Hamilton snorted and did not say anything. He turned around and walked towards the second floor, stepping on the creaking wooden stairs. After the excitement was over, the drunkards dispersed one by one. Unaffected, Captain Elland and the others returned upstairs to continue playing cards. Klein took the opportunity to follow. He returned to Flying Fish and Wine, not to deal with White Shark, who did not pose any threat to him, but rather to simply get more information from the owner of the bar, who was connected to many pirate factions. After all, he had named his new identity Gehrman, which secretly implied hunting pirates whose hands were stained with blood. He planned on using their souls, flesh, and beyonder characteristics to replace the souls in Creeping Hunger, who were awaiting their release. There was no gas in Demir Harbor, and the corridor on the second floor was relatively dark. The brass candle stands that were inlaid into each wall flickered and dimmed. Klein observed the surroundings as he wiped his face, silently transforming into one of the bouncers on the first floor. He used illusion creation to compensate for his mismatched attire. After finishing his preparations, he walked towards the room that his spiritual intuition identified as belonging to White Shark Hamilton. He first passed the card room, but he did not attract anyone's attention. He stopped in front of the bouncers who were guarding the corridor and said in a low voice,
"There is something going on downstairs again."
Holy Lord of Storms, what is happening tonight?
A bouncer sighed.
I hope those beautiful people do not get hurt.
Another guard said worriedly, He was referring to the whores who got their business in the bar.
They are fine.
Klein stepped past the bouncers and knocked on White Shark's door.
Who is it?
Hamilton warily asked.
Boss, it is me. Something happened downstairs again.
Klein remembered the information he gleaned while watching the commotion and deliberately hoarsened his voice.
Damn it!
Hamilton bellowed.
Come in and explain to me what happened.
Klein turned the doorknob and walked in. When he closed the door, he dispelled the illusion, and the muscles on his face rapidly squirmed, returning to his previous identity, a new customer with blonde hair, blue eyes, and ordinary facial features.
You.
Hamilton was stunned for a moment before he immediately opened his mouth wide in an attempt to shout loudly. At the same time, many illusory fish scales surfaced on the back of his hand, his originally large and fat body burgeoning. Suddenly, his heart began to beat faster, and a strong, instinctive fear seized him by the throat. At this moment, he felt that the stranger standing by the door was a demon that had been starved for many days, repeatedly examining his flesh and soul with an ice-cold, craving look in his eyes. All of a sudden, White Shark Hamilton was gripped by an extreme panic, and he failed to effectively respond. Klein slowly walked to the sofa and sat down. He politely smiled.
Now, can we talk calmly?
The feeling of being stared at by a horrifying monster suddenly disappeared. Hamilton relaxed, all of a sudden, while his body shriveled up a lot, like a punctured balloon. He did not rashly cry for help as he asked with beads of sweat lining his forehead.
Who are you? What do you want?
A hunter.
Klein answered casually.
I heard that you are connected to a number of pirate factions. I would like to know their respective situations.
No, I am not.
White Shark Hamilton subconsciously denied. He immediately felt the extreme hunger again, and he felt as if the man's eyes were dyed with a dark red layer. Klein inwardly deliberated over his persona and said with a gentlemanly smile,
You have two choices. One is to answer frankly. The second is to be killed by me and then answer honestly.
Killing to channel my spirit?
White Shark Hamilton had heard of similar rumors. He swallowed hard and asked,
Why do you want to know about any of this?
I am a hunter, so I am chasing after bounties.
Klein smiled and answered. Hamilton suddenly felt that the man's polite smile was tinged with an indescribable madness, and he could not help but blurt out,
Are you mad? I have seen many similar adventurers, but all of them have been buried at the bottom of the sea. It is not hard to kill a lone pirate, but can you defend against any further retaliation? The whores in the bar or the seemingly ordinary customers might all be pirate informants. Your friendly accomplice could be bribed at any moment, and you will be shot in the back. The pirates will gather information in advance and surround your ship. Can you protect all the passengers? Can you survive a cannon bombardment? On the sea where there is no room to run, how are you going to survive?
After venting the horror in his heart in one breath, he saw the man who called himself a hunter reveal a gentle and kind smile.
Just have them all killed, and then there will not be such a problem.
A true madman.
White Shark Hamilton immediately took a deep breath and said,
I am in contact with many pirates, but it is a passive relationship. They need to sell the cash, jewelry, and goods that they plundered in exchange for alcohol, food, fresh water, weapons, and women's comfort. This has to happen through me, but I can only wait here for them. I do not know where their ships pass or where they are going.
What else?
Klein asked calmly. Sop Bork. His reply just now was mainly to scare White Shark. As for having revenge sought on him by the pirates, he was not worried at all. As a faceless, he might as well find a place to drown himself at the bottom of the sea if they could find him so easily. And White Shark Hamilton's throat moved, without immediately giving an affirmative or negative description. He tightly closed his mouth and looked at the gentleman in the half-top hat. The gentleman's eyes were calm and reserved, as though madness was brewing within him. The uneasy silence was like the calm sea surface before a storm, gently resounding, colliding, and fermenting. Finally, Hamilton shifted his gaze away and placed his hand on the desk in frustration.
Yes, I am still gathering information for them. If there is any urgent information, I will use the radio transceiver they gave me to alert them.
White Shark did not dare to take the risk and was afraid that the man possessed unique beyonder powers that could determine if he was speaking the truth or if he was saying the whole truth.
Radio transceiver?
Klein, who had succeeded in laying his bets, sharply caught onto a noun.
That is what they call it when speaking to me. It is like a telegram, but it does not require a wire.
Hamilton turned and walked over to the gray safe and squatted down.
A wireless telegraph? The pirates possess such advanced technology?
Klein could vaguely guess what the radio transceiver was. He had previously thought of inventing something like this. But when he flipped through relevant magazines, he realized that wireless telegrams had long since appeared. However, it had not found its place in the commercial world. The Berserk Sea, which separated the northern and southern continents with its constant thunder and lightning, the chaotic magnetic field, and violent storms, made only a few sea routes accessible. Even if one was equipped with wireless telegraphs, they were almost useless. Similarly, the weather in the Fog Sea and the Sonia Sea had changed drastically, and there were a number of factors that affected electromagnetic transmission. The use of wireless telegrams had been severely restricted.
Could it be that there is an enhanced model that can solve some of those problems?
Klein watched as White Shark pried open the floor plank in front of the safe and twisted a mechanism to reveal a secret door in the wall. Behind the secret door was a hidden cabinet with 3 levels. On the top level were some documents and bills, a revolver, a new type of half-arm gun, and other weapons, while the bottom layer was filled with complicated black machinery. With just a glance, Klein deduced from his previous life's impression and the information he had gathered previously that the mechanical construct belonged to a radio transceiver.
That is what they call it. It is called a radio transceiver. The news it transmits can be received by similar items as far as the Rorstad archipelago. Any further and it will depend on the weather and one's luck. Usually it is very troublesome and limited.
Hamilton did not know much about the machine, and he was vaguely describing the corresponding situation based on his experiences using it and what he had been taught.
It is better than the new radio transceivers that are now being commercialized. I wonder who invented it.
Klein quietly listened and asked,
Who are they?
He made himself look like a bounty hunter who did not understand technology. White Shark Hamilton wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and said,
Silver Coin Viper Odor, who claims to serve the owner of the Dawn, as well as the intelligence officer of Admiral of Blood, Old Quinn. They appeared together, and I cannot be certain if they are working together. Of course, Odor has always only made claims.
The owner of the Dawn, that Queen Mystic?
Klein looked away, a gold coin appearing in his hand. The gold coin kept weaving between his fingers before finally leaping into the air and landing. It left White Shark puzzled as he trembled in fear and trepidation. Lowering his head to take a glance, Klein slowly stood up, masked. At this moment, he suddenly asked,
Who gave you the potion?
Old Quinn.
Hamilton hesitated but still chose to answer honestly. Klein nodded and no longer asked. He turned and walked towards the door. Thud! The wooden door opened and closed. The figure wearing a black coat disappeared from White Shark's room. Hamilton held his breath, waited for more than 10 seconds, and finally let out a long sigh. He quickly wiped the sweat from his face, placed the radio receiver on the desk, flipped through a code book, and hurriedly sent a telegram into the distance.
I was targeted by an unfamiliar fellow.
Beside the completely engrossed Hamilton, Klein had his hands in his pockets as he quietly watched, taking in the entire frequency spectrum and the passcodes. His departure just now was just a large-scale magic show, more than enough to deal with a low-sequence beyonder like White Shark's Sailor Pathway. As for the question of whether or not he would be able to remember the details later, a seer did not need to worry over it. A dream divination was enough to recall everything.
Admiral of Blood and his men enjoy killing and love blood. They are passionate about enacting violence against women. Every time they rob a passenger ship, they would always cause a tragedy. This is public information known by everyone, and they themselves were proud of it. They are never stingy with their proclamations. The target of the hunt and the risk involved. I will give priority to them.
Klein thought for a moment, and then prepared to leave the room while Hamilton tidied and put away the radio transceiver. He did not plan on dealing with White Shark for the time being, as he was afraid of disturbing the real prey. Anyways, this kind of fellow who was on land with a fixed territory could be easily dealt with in a letter later since he had dirt on him. Klein's soundless footsteps caused the door to slowly open and then quietly close, bringing in a slight cool breeze.